In this video, I explain and demonstrate how to use Kinich's talents. I even tested his damage each level, all the way to level 10. This way you can see exactly how much of a damage increase you'll get each level. I'll even give you a detailed explanation of when to stop leveling up his talents. But first, I'm sorry this video is out so late. It took me a lot longer than expected to farm all of Kinich's materials. I'm trying to get my videos out as fast as possible, but these types of videos take a ton of time and effort to make. So if you find this video helpful, consider joining my YouTube members for some awesome perks. Now let's get right into it. There isn't much to talk about with his normal attack talent, Nightsun style. It has a 3-hit combo and deals physical damage, although his charge attack is pretty unique. Instead of spinning around, Kinich throws his weapon at his enemies so that it spins in front of him. It'll do at most 3 hits and cost 50 stamina per use. His normal attack multipliers aren't too bad when comparing them to Diluc or even Eula, but because of how the rest of his kit works, there's no reason to ever use his normal attack in combat, so you should leave this talent at level 1. The only real redeeming factor is his normal attack animations. It's hilarious how he uses ajaw to swing around. Speaking of cool ajaw, he would be upset if I didn't mention his ability first. Kinich's burst, Hail to the Almighty Dragonlord, is pretty straightforward. He summons ajaw on a limited, conditional, restricted, contractual, partial, and temporary basis. Being the foul beast that he is, his first attack is this dragon fart attack. Then he follows it by unleashing his horrendous breath.
Get stuffed! Oh, just you wait! I'll find someone to beat you to death before the day is through!
Okay, but seriously, both this initial attack and his dragon breath deals Nightsoul aligned dendro damage in a small area. If you use this ability while Kinich is in his Nightsoul blessing state, then he receives a 1.7 second extension to his blessing's duration, so you don't really get to stay in his blessing state any longer than usual. In fact, it is still reduced by a half second, so there isn't any reason to use his burst specifically while Kinich is in his Nightsoul blessing state. Speaking of Nightsoul, if you're curious how blessings, transmissions, or even Nightsoul bursts function, then check out my Natlan Explained video where I go into detail on how Nightsoul and phlogiston mechanics work. But back to his burst. This ability costs 70 energy and has some pretty low damage multipliers. Guess that ajaw wasn't kidding about his abilities being on a limited, conditional, restricted, contractual, partial, and temporary basis. Especially if he really is the almighty Dragonlord.
You slimy, slithering, miserly worm! You're a selfish butthole!
Okay, take it easy, ajaw.
My fury cannot be contained!
His burst still deals a decent amount of damage, but at higher difficulties it's best used for dendro application, while Kinich is off-field. In floor 12 of the Abyss, and when Kinich is the only dendro character in the party, I found it's best to begin the fight with his burst, then get your party set up. It's also more ideal if he can burst every rotation, although it's by no means a deal breaker if he isn't able to. I'll make a separate video on how to build Kinich, including testing and ranking his best artifacts and weapons, so make sure YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you so you don't miss it. Sometimes YouTube glitches and unsubs people, so please take 2 seconds right now to check. But for now, just know that it's not worth investing in energy recharge stats for Kinich. If you happen to have high ER substats, that's fine, but you should prioritize attack and crit stats, or even elemental mastery first. But like I've already mentioned, it isn't necessary to burst off cooldown. This is because most of his damage comes from his skill, Riding High. Like all the other Natlan characters so far, the real meat and potatoes of his kit comes from his skill. It also can be used both in and out of combat. In both situations, it can either be tapped or held. In combat, Kinich will fire his grappling hook, attaching it to an enemy. He will then enter his Nightsoul blessing state with 0 Nightsoul points. This lasts for 10 seconds, and for its duration, Kinich will generate 2 Nightsoul points every second. This overrides his normal attack with loop shot bullets and is considered elemental skill damage. Luckily, this still uses his normal attack animation. That means that despite his loop shots being considered skill damage, they still trigger abilities that require a normal attack to function. Xingqiu, Fischl, and Toma are excellent examples. When you perform a loop shot, Kinich will automatically begin swinging around your ill-fated foe, firing off his pixelated projectiles, dealing Nightsoul aligned dendro damage, and generating 3 Nightsoul points. You can adjust the direction he's moving with your left and right movement controls. This can come in handy if you want to use him with someone like Kokomi. This is because her skill has a pretty small radius and it's easy to miss it going off while you're spinning around. This way, you can sway back and forth over her jellyfish. You can also change direction to dodge attacks. The trick here is to mash your normal attack and swing around as fast as possible. As you swing around your enemy, you'll notice these dendro pie slices that appear on the ground. Other than using his loop shots and waiting for Kinich to automatically restore his Night Soul points, you can enter these dendro pie slices to restore even more Night Soul points. These are called blind spots. It's important to fill up Kinich's Night Soul bar to full, not only because he can then use his most powerful attack, but it's especially necessary if you're trying to take advantage of the 4-piece set bonus from his signature artifact set. It requires you to consume at least 1 Night Soul point, and Kinich can only do this when he reaches 20 Night Soul points. At that point, he can consume all the points to perform his most powerful attack, Scalespiker Cannon. This attack has his highest damage multiplier. It's significantly higher than both his loop shots and his burst damage. But I'll go into more details on his Scalespiker Cannon in a moment. While you're spinning around, firing off loop shots, you can enter a pie slice, blind shot, and generate 4 Night Soul points. They are displayed as these green highlighted areas. Now the best way to generate Night Soul points is also by meeting his first passive talent requirements. In his Night Soul Blessing state, opponents that are hit by either of his skill's attacks and are affected by burning or burgeon will restore 7 Night Soul points to him every 0.8 seconds. So Kinich prefers to be in a team with at least 1 pyro character. If you don't take advantage of this talent, then you'll be missing out on at least one of his most powerful attacks per rotation. In most situations, while in burning and burgeon teams, you can do up to 4 of these attacks. Outside of these teams, you can only do up to 3. That might not seem like much of a difference, but these attacks can deal damage in the hundreds of thousands, so even missing just 1 can make a difference. So the main goal while using Kinich in combat is to quickly restore his Night Soul points so you can use his Scalespiker Cannon as often as possible. At first, it might seem like these blind spots will show up randomly, but there's actually a predictable pattern. It simply relies on where the enemy is on the screen with respect to Kinich. He will also automatically swing around the enemy based on where it is on the screen. In both situations, if the enemy is on the left side of the screen, then the blind spot will appear on the right side, and if you don't use your controls to move Kinich, then he will also move to the right side of the screen. The opposite will happen if the enemy is on the right side of the screen. The blind spot will be positioned on the left, and Kinich will automatically begin swinging clockwise towards the blind spot. So Kinich will automatically move towards the closest blind spot if the enemy is kept on the same side of the screen. If it happens to move to the opposite side, then be prepared to move Kinich in the opposite direction. What I mean by with respect to Kinich is that it doesn't matter what side of your screen the enemy is on. In this example, the Drake is clearly on the left side of my screen, but yet the blind spot is generated on the left. That's because from Kinich's perspective, the enemy is more to his right. This can make it pretty tricky to predict if your camera isn't directly behind him. But an easy way to start practicing your blind spot prediction skills is by waiting for a moment to fire another loop shot after you fire his cannon. This way you can see the next blind spot and have more time to adjust Kinich's movement. Once you have some practice, you can start moving around more quickly. But if you enjoy mashing buttons until your keyboard and mouse breaks, then you can just keep mashing both your normal attack and skill buttons while relying on pure reflexes to adjust Kinich's movement. Throughout my damage tests, I began to notice a pattern, but I wasn't sure what exactly was happening. It wasn't until I began doing research for this video that I learned about how this mechanic worked. So in some of the clips, you'll see me having to spin all the way around an enemy to reach a blind spot. But it does take some practice to master predicting the blind spots. But while I'm on the subject, I should also mention some things to watch out for while twirling around your foes. Kinich's grappling hook can function like a Yumkasaurus. So if you're in combat and a coil grass sigil happens to be nearby, then it's pretty easy to accidentally grapple to it instead of to an enemy. Also, if an enemy happens to exceed the maximum distance of the grapple, or if it snaps due to some other reason, you can use a normal attack to re-grapple your target. The maximum distance is actually fairly large. There's also something weird that can happen with large enemies, or enemies with an odd shape to them. Due to the Drake's long tail, can cause Kinich to get stuck on it. I think this happens because he will make a wide swing when approaching its tail, but when coming back around to its body, he will swing in very close. In this example, I swing Kinich to the left to enter a blind spot that's positioned behind the Drake. This makes Kinich extend his grapple, but because this moved the Drake to the opposite side of the screen in respect to Kinich, the next blind spot is basically directly in front of the Drake. So I swing Kinich towards it, but instead of keeping his distance, Kinich pulls himself in towards the Drake, close enough to be able to sniff the dried oil in between the Drake's toes. This makes him get stuck on his feet, so I had to quickly start moving around in the opposite direction to get unstuck. Luckily, his Night Soul points bar filled up, and I was able to generate a new blind spot. I nearly got Kinich stuck again, but the Drake moved just enough to get by its stinky feet. Granted, I've only noticed this happen on enemies with a weird-shaped hitbox. Okay, that's enough about his loop shots and blind spots. Now let's get to his main form of damage, his Scalespiker cannon. Don't worry, there's a lot less to discuss here. When he reaches 20 Night Soul points, you can either tap or hold his skill to fire his Scalespiker cannon, and can generate 5 elemental particles once per Night Soul blessing. According to the fandom wiki, his cannon will be fired faster when held. When I compared it side by side, it did appear to be slightly faster, so I suppose there will be some instances where that might be useful. But generally, it's best just to tap his skill when his cannon is ready. It's much easier and it has some exceptional tracking abilities. It will even track the perpetual mechanical array when it enters its SpaceX rocket mode. But if you use the aim mode, it won't lock on to enemies. Kinich has several abilities that revolve around this cannon shot. His second passive talent, Flame Spirit Pact, increases his cannon shot damage by 320% of his attack whenever a party member triggers a Night Soul burst. This lasts for 15 seconds and can stack up to 2 times. I explained how Night Soul bursts work in my Natlan Explained video. The link is in the description. But other than this passive talent, basically all of Kinich's important constellations have some effect on either his loop shots or his Scalespiker cannon. I prefer to go into details on things that I actually have experience with. Being as I'm not a whale, my Kinich is at C0, but his C1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 all play a role in boosting his skill's damage and abilities. Editing whisper here. I actually got a C1 after pulling for Chevreau's constellations. I've made something like 140 wishes and didn't get a single Chevreau's, but I'm pretty excited to test out Kinich's C1. I think I'll make a YouTube short comparing his C0 to C1, so turn on those notifications. Kinich's final passive talents mostly have to do with exploration. His Night Soul transmission can be used in combat, but unlike Mualani and Kachina, there really isn't any benefit other than shaving off about 1 second in your team rotation. So most of the time, you're most likely to use his Night Soul transmission while exploring. You can even use it while gliding. His final passive talent marks resources unique to Natlan on the minimap, and when collected, Kinich will increase your own party member's movement speed by 15% for 10 seconds. It's also worth noting that Kinich's skill functions like a Yumkasaurus, so it can also pick up Flame Grenade and Phlogiston explosive barrels. If you decide to pick one up and lug it around, then it will drain your Phlogiston meter until you fire it off using his skill. Kinich can also use Coilgrass Sigils in the same way that a Yumkasaurus can, so grappling to these won't affect Kinich's cooldown. While I'm on the subject of exploration, I found that Kinich excels at crystal fly gathering. Often they'll fly up just out of reach, so you can use Kinich to leap into the air before any stray crystal fly can make an escape. It's also worth mentioning that Kinich won't take full damage after you use his grappling hook. However, this only lasts for 5 seconds. Either activating your glider or doing a plunge attack will help you avoid making Ahaw's wishes of a flattened Kinich come true.
Go on then, go do a bungee jump, break a leg! Or better yet, break your neck.
Anyway...
Okay, before I get to Kinich's damage comparison, here's a few quick tips. His burst summons his nasty little minion to deal AoE dendro damage for 15 seconds. This ability is best used when Kinich is off field, so ideally you want to use his burst just before he leaves combat. His normal attack talent should be ignored because nothing in his kit deals normal attack damage. Instead, around 80% of his damage comes from his skill. These aren't exact numbers, just a rough estimate based on my experience with Kinich. He deals increased damage with his cannon when he has 2 Hunter's experience stacks from Night Soul bursts. If you have at least 2 Natlan characters in the party, then you can easily take advantage of this powerful damage buff. Finally, when building Kinich, you want to prioritize crit stats followed by attack, then elemental mastery, or energy recharge. If you use his signature artifact set, then keep in mind the crit rate bonus. You can easily go over 100% crit rate with this set. I'll have a deep dive video on Kinich's best artifacts and weapons. For now, just keep in mind the general rule of thumb for hypercarries such as Kinich. Consistently dealing crits is much more ideal than dealing a big crit every once in a while. So you want to have a 1 to 2 crit rate to crit damage ratio. For example, if you have 70% crit rate, then you should have at least 140% crit damage. Once you've reached 75% or more crit rate, it can be better to aim for a 1 to 3 ratio instead. Or in other terms, once you reach 75% or more crit rate, you can instead aim for 225% or more crit damage. This is because at around 75%, your crits will be very consistent, but you should always aim to have at least 65% crit rate on a hypercarry, regardless of how much crit damage you have. While on the subject of builds, here's how far you should build Kinich's talents. In order to demonstrate the best stopping point when leveling up Kinich's talents, I tested his damage from level 1 all the way to level 10. As usual, I used the Ion Blight Drake for all my tests, and this is the build that I use for all these tests. I've also ran these tests with Emilie and Mualani. The links to those videos will be in the description. Like in those tests, I built the team with only energy recharge in mind. I do this so that everyone is able to burst every rotation. I also don't want them dealing too much damage. I did end up building Kinich's signature artifact set, but I wasn't able to do this until after I finished all the testing. But onto the results. The resources required to level up characters' talents from level 1 to 6 are pretty minor when compared to the higher levels, so I skipped from level 1 to 6. Here Kinich saw an average damage increase of nearly 37% between his skill and burst damage. His cannon shot saw the lowest damage increase of just over 27%. Due to the somewhat random nature of his weapon, these averages are figured in with their most frequent damage rather than their peak damage. This keeps things much more consistent, but I did keep track of his peak damage in my notes section. If you go from level 1 skill and burst to level 10, Kinich has an average damage increase of nearly 74%. To give you a slightly different perspective, here's what the results look like when you go from level 6 to level 10 talents. Kinich has an average increase of nearly 27% between his skill and burst damage. But in order to demonstrate the best stopping point, here's what the results look like when comparing the damage of each talent level. As you can see, Kinich's average damage increase is reduced little by little each level, dropping down to just 5.5% when going from level 9 to 10. As you probably already know, it costs more and more resources each talent level, so here's exactly how much the resources increase. It costs nearly the same amount of Mora to go from level 6 to level 7 as it does to go all the way from level 1 to 6. Although, when factoring in all the other resources, it actually costs 32.5% less. But that means it also takes more resin to go from level 1 to 6 compared to 6 to 7. But when comparing level 7 to level 8, there's a 54% average increase in the amount of resources required. It also takes about 34% more resin. The largest talent material increase was going from level 8 to 9, increasing by nearly 81%. This massive increase is probably why going from level 9 to 10 only increased the amount of resources by 30%. It's also worth mentioning how much resin it costs. To put this in perspective, just to go from level 8 to 9, it takes 2 days straight if you wait for your resin to automatically restore. It's a little over 2.5 days to go from 9 to 10. That's close to 5 days from level 8 to 10. Now, this time is just for the resin. It actually takes longer because you are limited to how many boss materials you can gather each week. In my resin calculation, I figured in just 2 materials per week. All these figures are assuming you're completing the highest level domains with world level of 9. It is possible to get more than 2 materials per week, but it's far from a guarantee. This is why my recommendation is to stop leveling up Kinich's burst at level 6 and his skill at level 8. His burst doesn't deal much damage, so it's best used for Dendro application, so you could even leave it at level 1 if you wanted. It has a pretty small effect on his overall damage, no matter what level it is. His skill, on the other hand, is a much more worthwhile investment, although I still think level 8 is the best stopping point. Now, this isn't to say that you shouldn't crown Kinich's talents. In my opinion, leveling up a character's talents to level 10 is one of the best ways to show your appreciation for that character. So please feel free to ignore my recommendations if you really like Kinich. After all, I don't regret crowning Kinich's talents. I absolutely love him and I think he's an exceptional character, but I know each person's level of commitment to a certain character varies. So I hope this video helped you out. I seriously appreciate you for making it to the end of the video. If you like this video, then make sure you watch all my other videos. And if you want to help support my channel, consider becoming a member for some awesome perks. You get first access to videos and so much more. Thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing. I'll catch you in the next one. Subscribe.